Is the end of an era looming in Pittsburgh? After selling at the trade deadline, the once indomitable Penguins are careening towards a second straight season without a playoff berth. And with their future as murky as ever, there's a major elephant in the locker room: Sidney Crosby. Even at 36, he's still the Penguins' best player and the linchpin of the organization. It's virtually impossible to envision him in a different uniform. But given the current state of the Penguins and Crosby's age, a once unimaginable parting of ways between the franchise and the all-time legend now seems like it might actually make sense. And we're gonna dive into this messy situation right now. Sit back, relax, and take this in. For almost 2 decades now, Sidney Crosby and the Penguins have been synonymous with excellence. Since his much-anticipated NHL debut in 2005, Crosby has carried the Penguins to 3 Stanley Cup titles while cementing himself as a future Inner Circle Hall of Famer. And critically, with the exception of his rookie season, at no point throughout Crosby's career have the Penguins ever been a non-contender. They've always had a chance at the Cup. Well, that is until recently. Last season, for the first time since Crosby was a rookie, the Penguins missed the playoffs, snapping a streak of 16 consecutive postseason berths. It was a hard pill for Sid to swallow. In fact, as Sportsnet's Elliot Friedman reported, one of Crosby's teammates said he'd never seen Sid as pissed off as he was at the end of last season. Well, fast forward 11 months, and it's safe to say that Sid is even more pissed off now. After a transformative offseason in which Pittsburgh installed a new brain trust led by Kyle Dubas, who then brokered a blockbuster trade for Erik Karlsson, the revamped 2023-2024 Penguins have been mid. Maybe even worse than mid. Despite Crosby's continuing point-per-game brilliance, at no point this season have the Penguins been more than a few games above 500. Over the last 2 months, they've gone 8-12-3. And with less than 1/4 of their schedule remaining, Pittsburgh sits in the bottom third in the Eastern Conference, very much on the outside looking in at a playoff spot. So, ahead of the March 8th trade deadline, Dubas did something rather unusual in Pittsburgh. He sold, trading 2-time 40-goal scorer Jake Guentzel, a soon-to-be free agent who also happened to be Crosby's longtime line mate, for a future-oriented package from Carolina. That deal clearly frustrated Crosby, and incidentally, just about every pundit agreed that the Hurricanes got the better end of that deal, even with Guentzel currently sidelined with an upper body injury. And as you might expect, that trade hasn't reinvigorated the flailing Penguins. Pittsburgh has dropped both its games since the deadline in dreadful fashion, getting cumulatively outscored 9-1. And since March 7th, the Penguins have been outscored 15-1. Not good. In fact, this is likely the worst 3-game stretch in Crosby's 19 years with the Penguins. And this slide epitomizes the predicament now facing the Penguins and their increasingly frustrated superstar. For a while now, even though Pittsburgh hasn't won a playoff series since 2018, the Penguins brass has refused to turn the page on the Crosby era, continually opting to reload rather than rebuild. Now more than ever, though, it feels like the Penguins would be remiss not to consider moving on from Crosby via a franchise-altering trade, for their sake and for his. From the team's perspective, first and foremost, the Penguins just don't seem good enough to compete for a Stanley Cup, even with Crosby still producing at an extremely high level. Thanks to some serious drop-offs from Karlsson and Evgeny Malkin, the Penguins' offense has been shockingly anemic this season. And while their underlying metrics are encouraging, every single Penguins player with double-digit goals this year will be at least 32 years old next season. Banking on significant positive regression from such an old core is a dicey proposition. And given that Crosby turns 37 this summer and only has 1 season left on his contract, there's potentially a huge opportunity cost to keeping the band together. If the Penguins hang on to him and his game falls off next season, the return they potentially get for him at next year's trade deadline would pale in comparison to what they could get for him in a trade this summer. And if they were to extend him this offseason and then his game swiftly falls off, they'd be even more hamstrung moving forward. Now, an important caveat. Crosby has a no-movement clause in his contract. He'd have to sign off on any potential deal, and he said repeatedly that he wants to be a Penguin for life. However, if Crosby is interested in adding more Stanley Cups to his resume before he calls it quits, embracing a potential trade would arguably make more sense than working out another extension with the Penguins. It's not like Crosby has to worry about damaging his legacy in Pittsburgh. He's the most important player in franchise history after Mario Lemieux, and that wouldn't change even if he won a Stanley Cup with Philadelphia. And it's not like there isn't a precedent for Inner Circle Hall of Famers getting traded either. The Oilers traded Wayne Gretzky. The Oilers traded Mark Messier. Hell, the Penguins traded Jaromir Jagr, and he just had his number raised to the rafters in Pittsburgh. At the end of the day though, no matter how much sense a trade might make, Crosby's future ultimately comes down to Crosby. He's earned the right to dictate where his career goes from here, and there's little doubt that the Penguins would accommodate him, whether that's with a contract extension or a trade. And while it's still hard to picture number 87 in a different uniform, it's not nearly as hard as it used to be.